Hi, this is Steve Roest, and you're listening to Health Tech Hour on UK Health Radio. Each week, we give you the best news, views, and interviews from the health technology world. From CEOs and founders to entrepreneurs and clinicians, the companies and people that are shaping the future face of healthcare. All on the world's #1 talk health radio. Hello and welcome to this week's Health Tech Hour with me, Steve Roest. Each week, we bring you the best news, views and interviews with the leaders, clinicians, CEOs, founders who are shaping the face of the healthcare revolution in the UK and beyond. As regular listeners know, I'm a health tech founder myself. My company is called PocDoc. PocDoc support the show, and we are delivering the full cardiovascular pathway digitally, which is all very exciting. If you'd like to find out more, please go to mypocdoc.co.uk. As ever, at the top of the show, I want to say thank you to the team at UK Health Radio for the live platform. Our numbers are really great. We really appreciate you listening. Thank you very much. Thanks for all of the questions and the comments and everything. Thanks to Johan and his team as well for all of the production support. If you are listening on any of the podcast channels, thank you for downloading it. It looks like this month's going to be our best month ever. Last month was our best month ever, and this month has just smashed it. So thank you very much. Also, to let you know, all UK Health Radio shows are available on Spotify now. We have our own channel, Health Tech Hour on Spotify, but we also feature on the UK Health Radio channels, as do all of the other shows on the station. Johan and his team do a fantastic job. So if you head over to the UK Health Radio section on Spotify, you can find all of that stuff. This week marks a return in a big way to the area of women's health. It's been a while since we've dealt with anything specifically in this sector, and I know quite a few people listening have asked us to come back and talk about it, which is we're really happy to do. We have Dr. Claudia Pastides on, who is the Director of Medical Accuracy at Flo Health. Flo Health started as an app for women to track their menstrual cycles, but now is able to do much, much more, not least because it has 48 million active users per month and has longitudinal data for over 100 million people that they've been tracking for 7 years. And that enables Flo to do some really cool things, which we'll get into, but also I assume we'll figure it out, but I assume it creates quite a puzzle sometimes for the Director of Medical Accuracy to make sure that everyone and everything stays on track. So Claudia did 12 years in the NHS as a GP, then was one of the early joiners at Babylon Health, now is at Flo, and in the middle of all of that, she found time to be a TV doctor with ITV. So quite busy. So Claudia, welcome to the show. How are you? And also I will say award winner. So Claudia and I, full disclosure, we met for the first time at the MedTech World Awards back in November in Malta, where I was lucky enough to present Claudia with an award. So anyway, Claudia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello, Steve. That was an awesome introduction. Did you mention that I also have 3 children and a massive dog?
I didn't mention that because I didn't know. Sometimes we've had people who didn't want us to talk about their family, so I kind of wait for someone else to mention it. So
fair enough.
No, I didn't want to dox you.
I'm introducing them as well. So
okay, great.
They are very much a part, and I partially introduced them because the giant dog is around, and he's normally very good on podcasts, and he's very good on work meetings and Zoom calls. But if you hear a lot of noise, I apologize.
Well,
it's probably
to all our listeners, sorry about that. Yeah. I can say from experience, Johan loves a bit of background noise when he's trying to, do a live edit. So we love that. So no, all good, all good. So look, thanks a lot for coming on the show. It's really good to have you. I think, as I said before the show, I want to try and set the scene a bit to begin with, a little bit. So I want to set the scene a little bit with Flo, and then get into your background as well, because I think you've had a really interesting journey to where you are right now. And I think that obviously as more and more and more of our healthcare moves digitally, the role of someone overseeing medical accuracy becomes even more critical as these services scale and more and are asked to do more, right? The kind of shift from being a menstrual cycle tracker into all of the stuff that you're doing now is quite a move. So just so we're all on the same page at the beginning of the show, When Flo started, what was the specific problem that it was trying to address or did address? Like the very, very core thing that was causing problems for women?
Yeah. So a few years ago, there weren't really very many period trackers about on the market. And we know, I wasn't involved obviously back then. I've joined a couple of years ago, but we know that this is something that is a problem for women because yes, you can have pen and paper and you can keep a note of it, but it's not the same. It's not the same as using some AI, tracking symptoms, being able to predict with really great accuracy, actually, when your next period is due. So at the core, it began sort of to provide a really user-friendly, really nice app that's just very easy to track, very easy to predict your cycle. And along with that, okay, it's great to track your cycle, but what about everything else around women's health, including what about all that information, all that content that would be incredibly useful to know? Yeah, great, your period is a little bit late. But what does that mean? What is late? Is it more than 2 days, 4 days? For that individual, what's their normal range? And what does that mean if they're outside of it? Mm-hmm. It's more heavy this month. What does that actually mean? What could it mean? When should you go see a doctor? So there's this part of women's health where we know people aren't going straight to the doctor with this. You don't go to your GP and say, you know what, I'm 2 days late today. Is that late? It's very rare for people to book an appointment for that, right?
I would also, in this day and age, I'm not sure necessarily they'd get an appointment all too quickly if that was the only symptom.
That also. So who answers that question? Do you turn to Google, which is actually quite a non-specific answer sometimes? You could get quite a generic answer. Do you turn to all these sort of like online community platforms and get the experience of other people, but they're not necessarily medically credible? Or do you use something like this, which is an app that's medically credible, everything is fact-checked, everything is done with doctors all the way through from beginning to end, and get more individualized information? Let's put it that way. It's more individualized to your cycle. You are this many days late, and this is what it could mean.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what that all makes a huge amount of sense to me. Just again, to be, I guess, potentially more from our listeners who may not have necessarily tracked their menstrual cycle, whether they happen to be men or otherwise. Why is that tracking piece important? Beyond wanting to know and needing to know, why is it actually really important that women might want to do that or should do that or can do that? And like, I get your point, like pen and paper previously, nightmare, you know what I mean? Like not going to work very well. And I also understand digital technology allows you to track, but why is it so important that that is there? And that what problems did that specifically solve, or does that solve?
It solves a few problems. One of the problems is the practical side. There's a very practical side to menstruation, which is that you can not know when your cycle is, when your period is next due. You could be out somewhere and you're not prepared. There's that practical side. You haven't got your pads, you haven't got your tampons. And with this, you know roughly when it's going to be, sometimes pretty precisely when it's going to be. So there's that practical side of it. But also there's more to it than that, because for a long time, women's health hasn't been very, very well researched. And what we're finding is that the symptoms that you experience throughout your cycle are related to your cycle in certain ways. They can also flag certain medical conditions, for example, polycystic ovarian syndrome, having a very irregular cycle. Some people, many people, I would say, don't know what the basics and what the normals are of a menstrual cycle. We don't learn it. The education at school is quite poor. Mm-hmm. You don't pick up an awful lot from friends, from family. It's been a pretty taboo subject to talk about. But when it's there inside your app, it's there inside your hand, and you can see and you can track and spot when things are changing, when your discharge has changed, when the length, the heaviness, so on and so forth has changed. That is incredibly useful, because then you can use that information. You can then go to your doctor and say, look, it's been irregular the last few times. Could this be something?
And is that how it happens? That's the interaction then with the healthcare provider, which is like actually because you have that basis of data, you can go to them and actually have that conversation and feel more confident, and they can feel more confident in it.
Exactly. And we have this doctor's report. It pulls in all of your data over the last 3-6 months even, and then you can see your patterns when you have particular symptoms.
Like
for
it
example,
collates,
over the last 6 months.
it like collates it into a nice doctor-friendly certificate or report.
Exactly. Yes. Then you can take that to the doctor. But even before that, you yourself will see that there are changes, and you can then think, okay, maybe this in itself could be a trigger to go and to see someone. Because again, people think that period pain is normal. People think that PMS symptoms are always normal. And a lot of these things have been ingrained in us as being very much normal. And we wouldn't go and seek medical advice unless somebody says, actually, this cycle length and the variation, not normal. Actually, this period of pain, this whatever, perhaps not normal. Go and see somebody about it and find out more.
Right. And if you can't track it, then you won't know, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you can't track it, you won't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we're all on the same page now, which is great. So let's just go back a few steps. You started working in the NHS as a GP.
Yes.
And what prompted that? What inspired you to be a doctor?
Well, my parents are doctors. Is that a terrible answer?
No, I don't know.
A lot of people that feel the same.
My parents. No yes or no. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's whatever the truth is, I guess.
That's the truth. My parents are doctors. I have to be honest. I really didn't know anything else. I loved writing. Okay. I loved marketing, which always sounds really weird when I say that. As a child, I loved marketing. I really loved marketing. I loved looking and scrutinizing the packaging on everything and TV advertisements and being fascinated that you can take something and advertise it and promote it in all these various ways. So I really enjoyed those. But to be honest, I didn't really know anything very different other than medicine. My parents were doctors. My grandparents were doctors. I went down the medical route and I loved obs and gynae. I loved it. It was my absolute favorite. And my mum, who was a surgeon, but then converted and became a GP later in life, she told me I was absolutely bonkers and said, you will never sleep another night again. So I recommend, if you want to look after women and children, go do general practice. And I thought, okay. General practice is
for you. So what was it about obs and gynae that really spoke to you?
It was a combination of things. I thought there's something very practical about obs and gynae. It was, this is it. This is the organ. This is what changes. This is what happens. This is how we fix it.
Right.
I really understood it. I felt like I understood it very well.
Okay.
I also had various experiences earlier in childhood with family members, also with myself, where I found that there was such a huge gap in knowledge around menstrual health, women's health, and I wished that I'd known more, or I wish my grandma had known more. So this includes, gynecological cancers and so on. So that also, I think, is partly what also drove me towards it. And obviously, I loved pregnancy. I really enjoyed it. It was a very positive, albeit sometimes terrifying vibe. It was wonderful being in the delivery room. I got a real buzz out of it. Yeah, so it was a nice specialty.
Okay. And so how was your time in general practice? I guess that's kind of, quite a broad statement, but, good bits, bad bits,
Yeah. Began great. I loved it. As a doctor, I thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I also discovered in my GP training, I loved mental health. And it was great to be able to, good significant chunk of the workload was mental health. So I absolutely loved it. The more senior I got, the more I guess I worked and the more exposed I was, and also the more solo I was. I don't think there's nothing ever to me has felt quite as solo as being a GP, and it's you and that patient, and it's one after the other coming in, and it's your brain and your decision. And once they've left your door, they've left your door. They're not on a ward. There's no monitoring. There's no immediate investigation. So that was great, and there was a great challenge. But at the same time, the more senior you become in general practice, the more of that responsibility that you have. And it became it became really difficult, really draining. This burnout that people talk about, I very much experienced burnout emotionally, physically, absolutely everything. Put that together with 3 small children as well. I had 3 under the age of 4 at the time.
Wow, that's tough.
Finished training. So it was really difficult, very stressful. began great. Towards the end, really hard.
And do you think that, like, when you were there, were you starting to see some of the warning signs that are now sort of coming to fruition? Coming to fruition is not the right thing, not the right phrase, but sort of the emergency situation that we have now in the UK at general practice.
I feel like I was experiencing that even then. I feel like this situation even then. I feel like I was so overwhelmed and so busy, and that the best term I can think of is firefighting. I was firefighting a lot of the time. So to imagine that things have gotten worse, I'm obviously not in the UK anymore. I relocated to Cyprus, so I don't know. I keep up as much as I can, but I don't know how much more it has changed. But to hear that it is very difficult right now, I know how hard it felt even 5 years ago. So I can't imagine if it's harder now, how it must be for people.
I don't know, did you see anyone when you were a GP or in your practice where you had someone coming in using Flo or had come in and been like, this is my information, or like, had you been exposed to it at that point on like the front line before you sort of started working there?
Yes. So to Flo, I had in that respect when I was an obs and gynae trainee. Well, not trainee, doing part of my GP training, obs and gynae. Yes. In routine clinic, people coming, this is how it's been, this is what it's like, this is what my cycle looks like. So yes, also in general practice as well. Yeah, so I had been exposed to it, and also I personally had started tracking my own cycle also a few years actually before I joined Flo.
And you were it sounds like kind of reasonably positive towards it, right? When people were coming in and doing that, you felt positive about the fact that they were doing it. Sorry, a different way to ask the question. Did anyone have an issue with it, or is it just generally net positive? Is there any like counter argument as to why you should be doing it? Is there any downside to doing it?
To tracking your cycle?
Yeah, like, because I know, so I'll give you a good backstory. Like we have people on the show doing that have come up with various different innovations or businesses or so on, and launching a new company or a new pathway or a new solution within an existing healthcare system, generally speaking, there generally tends to be a counter argument somewhere as to like why this won't work, or I don't like it, or I won't use it, or like, I'm just curious if you experienced any of that.
I haven't faced that. And actually, we talk to a lot of doctors, and we have a lot of obstetricians and gynecologists and lots of other specialists that we work with and that are involved in checking our content too. And no, I never have, because what's the other option? The other option is it's the pen and paper that you bring in.
Or you don't. Like the other option is nothing.
All. And that is the most frustrating for everybody. There are Instagram reels out there all over the shop just about this exact problem. The obstetrician gynecologist asking, when was your last period? And you're sort of sitting there looking into space, waiting for some miracle to come, because it's not easy to remember. So definitely, even for doctors, it's been incredibly useful for people to be able to have it very easy to find. The dates are very easy to find.
I think that's really interesting. Like 50% of the population, give or take, right? You know, roughly, I assume. Like
51, I think.
Okay, sure, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like around there, plus or minus, have this like ongoing baseline benefit/need to tracking a particular thing that actually it turns out is like relatively simple to keep track of if you have the right tooling and platform and products and stuff like that. That actually turns out that the healthcare system really likes you to track it and keep a track of it. And like, it's a bit strange that it like took until whenever it was that Flo and the other trackers started to, it took until smartphone technology, I guess, sort of took off for it to be able to be done. I just think that's kind of interesting, right? Like we lived for hundreds of years without there being any other solution. And, you know, women were just sort of left to kind of suffer and swing in the wind.
And it's very win-win for everybody. For the user, it's also win-win. It's great for the doctor too. And that's why it's such a popular app, and it's so hugely downloaded and does so well.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, actually, because, you know, and we've experienced this at PocDoc, and I'm sure loads of innovators in the health technology space have felt it. You know, like, for example, I know the company you went to, Babylon, had this, right, where they were one of the pioneers around virtual GPs, right? Like on the paper, people should like that, but there was a very strong cohort of people, GPs and healthcare professionals, that really did not like that, you know, and they were really against that for quite a while. Whereas in this instance, it kind of seems like everyone's sort of like, yeah, this just makes a lot of sense to do. There's not really a huge, like, I don't know, counter narrative to it, which I think is really interesting and unusual.
Yeah, it does make sense. And you've got to do it well, though. You need to have doctors involved. There needs to be a lot of thought, a lot of research behind it. But absolutely, if you've got the right people there at the table involved and ideating these ideas and putting it together, then yes, it's brilliant. It's a wonderful solution. So many people I know are using Flo everywhere I go.
Well,
at least one person in that room does.
Yeah, so. It's quite, it seems to have quite a lot. But before the show, I kind of asked around in a not weird way. You know what I mean? It's not like you want to be like, just checking in with you, what tracker you're using. But it was fine. It was all fine. And generally there seemed to be a pretty high awareness of it. But we have to go for a quick commercial break now. But after the break, I want to pick up on that very specific thing that you said, which is, yes, it's good to do, but you have to do it well. There have to be doctors involved and so on and so forth. And that, like, more digging into this role of medical accuracy, because I think that topic particularly is very much part of the current zeitgeist, which is you can find a huge amount of information out there across a range of different things. I know we're talking about one specific thing now, or a sort of subsection of things around women's health, menstrual health, reproductive health. But actually, why is it critical that you have that role in any of these type of businesses? So I think we can get into that after the break. We'll be back after a quick commercial break with Dr. Claudia Pastides, the Director of Medical Accuracy for Flo Health. We'll be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Apples and pears, beef and skittles, cider with Rosie, common or garden, ant and deck, fish and chips, mum and dad.
UK Health Radio and Health Triangle magazine. Each is good by itself, but enjoying both is always better. Add Health Triangle magazine to your monthly health regime. Check it out at ukhealthradio.com.
Strawberries and cream.
Once upon a time, human slavery was just a fact of life. Right now, animal abuse is often considered normal. In time, it won't be. Animal Aid campaigns peacefully against all forms of animal abuse and promotes cruelty-free living.
Check out animalaid.org.uk. It's time for a kinder world.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Hello and welcome back to this week's Health Tech Hour with me, Steve Roest, and my guest this week, Dr. Claudia Pastides, who's the Director of Medical Accuracy at Flo Health. Right, so before the break, you said something which was that tracking is universally considered to be a good idea around menstrual health, but you have to do it well, you have to do it properly, there have to be doctors involved. Could you elaborate a little bit on exactly why that is the case and what exactly that role is within Flo that makes it just more than just a tracker?
Why you need to have doctors involved,
or how, like when, I'll let you answer the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Carry on.
When is all the way, everywhere, in every single part, and even from the ideation part, coming up with ideas and thinking, what would be a great feature to add? What would be a great piece of content to include? It's a great idea always to have someone medical because they have a very unique perspective. They are people themselves and they have experience, obviously, as human beings themselves.
Yeah.
But they also have that amazing added value, I believe, of having looked after thousands and thousands of people, thousands of unique individuals in whatever healthcare setting that they were in. So I think it's really useful to have a doctor involved somewhere in the earlier stages too, when it comes to health tech related ideation, content, whatever else. But also checking, because ultimately you put all these amazing creative brains together and you get all the engineers and you make something fabulous, but you need to make sure that that end product is safe, that it's accurate medically, And it's very rare for everybody else in the company to also have a medical degree. There aren't going to be lots of people who are multi-skilled, are engineers and have a medical degree, so can understand from the engineering side as well, but from the health side as well. So you need to have doctors involved to check as well at the end, even before you release, long before you release, various iterations along the way. Is this right? Could this be done better? Is it as accurate as possible? Is it based on the best quality research? Is it guideline based? And what is the risk? Like, what is the actual risk to this individual? Because you imagine, I always say the same thing, but you press send on, let's say, an article, because articles are predominantly, and content is predominantly what I work in the app. You press send and you send this article to those 48 million monthly active users, potentially will put their eyeballs on that article.
Yeah.
Is it safe? Is what you've said there as safe as possible? Is there any medical risk to that? Have you thought about it well enough from as many angles as possible to suit as many individuals as possible? So I believe...
I think that's really interesting, right? Because that must lead to some really interesting discussions, because there's sometimes there's a definitive answer, right? Like, I don't know what it might be, but there's something where it's like clearly black or white. But I would imagine in a lot of instances, that's not necessarily the case. And so it might be the case for 60% of the audience, but not for 40% of the audience, or like under certain circumstances, yes, and certain circumstances, no. So how do you kind of deal with that? It's
one of our biggest challenges, because also we're global, right? We're not just in the UK. We're also in the US. We're also in Brazil. We're also in all these other places. So it is a humongous challenge. Every article, everything that we write, or every widget, or whatever it is that we do inside the app, we need to consider also globally how appropriate is it. And you might find a guideline. I can give you the most simple example is how often will a period come? So period cycle length. Cycle length in the UK is said to be 23 to 35 days is normal. In the US, it's 21 to 35 days. So even there, when you create your algorithm on what is a normal cycle, what do you go with? 23 to 35, 21 to 35? But in the other audiences, it's 21 to 45. So should we swallow them too? Or should we make a separate segment for the young ones? All of this is so complicated. And that's why it's so great. We've got an internal medical team, because we pull all the data, all the everything, we sit, and we have to make a decision, and we make the best possible decision that we can using, our medical experience and all these guidelines together. And that's the way it has to be. That there is no other way. And this is the best way that we found to do it.
And what's the interplay between what you decide as individuals and you curate as individuals on the platform, whether that be features or articles or advice or guidance, versus what's originated by some kind of AI or machine learning or, algorithm? How does that kind of interplay between each other?
You mean, how is what we create different from if you were...
Yeah, I mean, more like, I'm guessing, well, I might be wrong, but there'll be some instances on the platform where it's an algorithm that's providing you, based off of the information that you provide to Flo or the app, there is some information that's generated by algorithms. That information may be curated by individuals, it may not be curated by individuals, but there'll also be a whole nother set of information that's purely originated by individuals. And I guess I'm just interested about the interplay and which sort of, who does what and how that kind of works together.
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have 2 medical directors. And now you've put it that way, I now realize why.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense.
Right.
I'll have to tell our chief medical officer that. That's supposed to be why. Because there's myself who looks after the content side, and that's internal content, external content, PR, social media, all of this. And I have a team of doctors who work in my team there. And then we have another director, and his role and his team's role is more to look at the algorithms and to make sure that everything there is okay and as good as possible. So, and as safe as possible. So I'm the medical director for accuracy, and he is for safety. And the safety medical director deals more with that side of things. So
I think that's a really interesting way of phrasing it, actually. I think that makes a lot of sense, which is, it's a more like a check and a balance that the automated systems or the algorithmic systems are working safely. That makes a lot of sense. So what are the kind of really exciting things that Flo is able to do beyond just tracking? your cycle? Because I know there's quite a lot that you are doing that is way beyond just tracking.
Yeah, exactly right. So yes, there's the tracking and tracking your symptoms. So it's not just tracking your cycle, but it's all the symptoms and being able to see how those symptoms fluctuate and if there's patterns for you with those symptoms through your cycle. Also, if you're trying to conceive, there's an arm of the app, let's say, there's a part of the app that helps you if you're trying to conceive, tells you when you're likely to ovulate, the things to look out for, and so on. There's also the pregnancy side of the app, and this will mean from when you realize that you're pregnant all the way through to delivery. You'll be able to see how your baby's developing and what's happening to your body as well, and what may be normal, what may not be, and so on and so forth. So there's that part as well. We've got a teens part too. So the way we speak to, and like I mentioned, what is a normal cycle for a teen? It's different from what is for a non-teen. So the algorithms there are different. The content there also is different. So these are some of the things, but all of these are based more around tracking and numbers and data. Alongside that, we've got articles. And alongside that, we also look at patterns too. So we look at the patterns of the symptoms, and you can see on the home screen, if you scroll down, you can see that in this particular phase, you've logged the last 3 months, this particular symptom every time. And that can be really useful as well. Is it normal for me? Is it not normal for me? Or shall I take this to my doctor? We've also got, because I think this is really important when it comes to health, is yes, your doctor or your app can tell you all of these things, but sometimes you want to speak to someone else who's in the same boat as you, whether they're pregnant, trying to conceive, just tracking their cycle. So there's a community part also to the app, and it's an anonymous community app where people can post whatever questions they want, have a chat with each other, and just have a general laugh. It's a great place to look for a lot of really, really great entertaining comments, but also people support each other a lot through all these various stages of life. And I think that's also really important. It is moderated. Yes.
I was going to say,
Well, we've got a medical advisor that's dedicated to that whole side of the app as well. So we're very careful. We have medical experts comment as well. So you'll say somebody will ask something. We will often have a medical expert's comment pulled into the very popular, the more busy threads to sort of lay the ground. Actually, this is the case. This is what medical evidence says, or this you need to know as well.
Okay.
So yeah, there's that part also. Have I missed anything?
That's quite a big list.
There's loads of social media.
Okay. Loads of social media. All right.
There's a lot.
Okay. But do you find, interestingly, do you find, that's probably, I don't know, in the markets that you're in, which are UK, US, Brazil, you mentioned a few, do you actually have to try and persuade any women, or persuade women more generally, that tracking is a good idea? Are you still having that conversation? Or is that sort of a bit of a done and dusted one, and it's more about how and where and what they use and keeping up with it? Or like what, I'm just curious about what sort of stage you feel like the situation is at.
You know what? I wish I had the stats to hand. The stats that I can remember, because I don't want to tell you wrong information, but the stats I can remember is that in not young teens, 18 to 19-year-old teens in the UK, 1 in 2 use Flo. I hope I've got that right. But 50%, which is amazing. And that to me shows you, and that's use Flo. The other 50%, I don't know what else they use.
But that's incredible market penetration. That's incredible.
But I doubt these other 50% use nothing. I think actually they also use something, just perhaps not Flo. So I don't think we need to have that conversation, certainly with, I don't want to say younger women, because I consider myself very young, but certainly with women.
We won't get into that one, but yes, I would say, let's just say yes.
Women under the age of 30, we don't really need to have that conversation with. And the market penetration there is pretty awesome. Women over the age of 30 or over the age of 35, I think we can still have that conversation. And what's most interesting about this group is that they are the group that in many ways are most interested in tracking and knowing what's going on and feel like they want to be really in tune. But for whatever reason, they're not using apps as much as the younger again, inverted commas.
I mean, if you've got, I mean, if those numbers are, well, I assume they're true, but and this might be the case, and I just don't know, which is possible. But are you working with the NHS in any way, shape, or form? Or because obviously, I know that they just did the first digital therapeutic, which was Sleepio. I'm like, again, don't know much about this market, if anything at all. So I don't want to sound like a complete muppet, but I would suspect that if 50% of women under 18 are using this to manage their cycles and so on and so forth, there's just an inherent benefit there. And so I guess I'm just curious as to whether you feel like that's a pathway or not really.
I'm not sure if this is something that's been explored, actually.
It's kind of interesting, right? Sure it's like, I don't know. I mean, obviously they don't have cash to spare, clearly, right? But you know, I just I think it's kind of interesting because clearly huge volumes of people are using it or using some form of tracking, and there must be some kind of health benefit, mental health, physical health, that then has downstream impacts and benefits in the healthcare system. I just think I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm sure you're right. You have to remember also that the tracking functionality of the app, so the very core of it, is free. Anybody could use it freely. There's no cost. You can download that.
Right.
You can use it to track your cycle freely anyway. And you're able to take that to your doctor and you can look back through your cycles and see when your last period was and so on and so forth. But the complementary stuff, like a lot of the articles, I completely forgot to mention, we've got chatbots. We've got these virtual assistants, and Sadiq will kill me because these are his baby.
Okay, sorry, Sadiq.
He's the medical director. The medical director of safety. You'll have to get him back to balance out what Flo's actually about. So these bits are the paid parts of the apps, access to the content, the chatbots, and so on. But the tracking side of it is free.
Okay, and so with the group, I don't know if you saw, but there was some articles published, I think last week, around Childline in the UK, which is a big charity, children's charity, and they were coming in for some criticism because someone had done a meta-analysis of their online forums around they've done some meta-analysis, and I can't remember the statistics, but the general gist of it was there were younger people presenting with questions around gender identity, and that they were being coached, or allegedly coached, in lots of instances in supposedly moderated forums around certain decisions around gender identity and things like that. How do you guys think about sort of safeguards and things like that for that teen community, or can they not access the forums, or how do you guys think about that stuff?
Around checking and monitoring the forums?
Yeah, well, like I can imagine. Well, again, I can imagine that young people questions around menstrual cycles may be bundled up with certain questions around gender identity in certain instances and certain decisions around treatments or whatever it might be. There might also these things might get conflated in some instances. I see what you mean. And so I'm just interested to see what I'm using that as an example to explore the safeguarding for the younger people. That's all.
Of course. No, so it is very much moderated. Actually, the main thing that we are very careful about is that what is put there is not seen as medical advice. And that can be actually really frustrating for our moderators. And this is something that we come across very often, because the best bit about the community is freely being able to speak and say what you want. And that's the engaging bit and the funny bit and the personal story. But it's very easy for something to be misconstrued as medical advice from people who don't have any medical background, any medical credibility. And so we have actually a very, very, very low threshold. We do have a very low threshold to just be extra super careful in the comments that people put there, that they are as safe as possible, aren't providing any medical guidance or information that can be misinterpreted by people. So we take that responsibility very seriously. And everything that goes out there, even the questions, for example, that are put to get conversations going, go via the medical advisors, especially when they are medical feeling in context.
That sounds like a huge amount of work.
It is a huge amount of work.
Keep on top of that. That sounds.
And that's why it's so frustrating to the moderating team and to the team there. It is very frustrating. And there is a desire sometimes to relax things a bit, to also get conversation going, not to relax things a bit so that things go all haywire, but just to get conversation going. But you have to balance, right? And when it comes to the medical safety and medical accuracy side of things, we have to balance it a bit more in favor of being as safe as possible.
And do you think that's one of the things that again, I don't know the market all that well, but is that one of that emphasis on medical accuracy, professionalism, high level of clinical accuracy, is that something that differentiates Flo from other possible potential people who are in the tracking space?
Yeah, we have a huge, huge onus on medical credibility, on accuracy, on safety. Absolutely huge. And it's really important to us. And actually, the way we produce everything isn't just us. It's also using medical experts, so other consultants who are clinically practicing from all around the world to also advise us and also review and check stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we take the medical credibility and accuracy side of things super, super carefully. But I think what also differentiates us is not just that, it's that happy marriage, I think, that Flo does really well, which is why I love working there so much, is where we're able to balance being fun and being engaging and making people want to come back and read something and check something out with the medical credibility. And that is really hard. It's really hard to do, but I think we do that really well. And I think because we do that really well, the app does so well. Yeah,
I think that's a really interesting point, which is how do you, because it's not just a tracker, it's a platform, it's a community, it's ongoing advice, it's a website, a brand, a choice for people to interact with it and go on it. It's almost like a social media platform in and of itself, without certain features, anyway. But that like level of engagement, right, which is really hard to do in digital health or in health generally. Because a lot of the time you're dealing with an acute problem, and once that acute problem's solved, then why would I continue to need to talk about it until I have my next acute problem? And some of these problems are not problems that people necessarily want to talk about all that much, So I think it's really, really interesting that you guys have managed to crack that at the scale that you have done.
Yeah, it's the tracking as well, because we can see when our users most come in, it's that time when they're expecting their period or when they log their period. You get an influx of people at that point, and that's an amazing point to share lots of information about all sorts of other things, including sexual health, for example. Right. Where do you go to get that information? You want to search for something in particular. You don't want to Google it because you don't know what's going to come up, especially when it comes to sexual health stuff. Yeah. Where are you going to go? Actually, there it is. So we can present a lot of this information to people opportunistically also when they're there tracking their cycle. And we talk about stuff in the same way all the time, like in the same medically credible but as engaging as possible way, whether you're talking about sex, female ejaculation and whatever else, or whether you're talking about polycystic ovarian syndrome and trying to conceive and ovulation and what you can look out for. We talk about everything is non-taboo, safe space, come, feel very welcome to read about all these things that you don't learn about at school, still feels very taboo and people don't like to talk about it very much. Right. And here it is in the most engaging and interesting way that we can do it.
Okay, I think we're going to pick up on some of that stuff after the next commercial break. So we're going to go into our final part of the show with Dr. Claudia Pastides from Flo Health. We'll be right back after 2 minutes of commercial break.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Animal Aid campaigns peacefully against all forms of animal abuse and promotes cruelty-free living. We've been doing this for over 40 years. Every year, more and more people are living satisfying lives completely cruelty-free. Check out animalaid.org.uk. It's time for a kinder world.
A cancer diagnosis can be scary and stressful for everyone involved. Hello Love is a contemporary living space and well-being center in central London where anyone can come and learn about illness prevention and non-toxic practice. Inside, you will find a vegan restaurant, juice bar, and holistic dojo that encourage lifestyle changes to help heal mind, body, and spirit connection. Cancer patients are offered free sessions. To find out more, please visit us at hellolove.org.
The station that makes you feel good.
Hello and welcome back to this week's Health Tech Hour with me, Steve Roest, and my guest today, Dr. Claudia Pastides from Flo Health. This is the final part of the show. I want to kind of pick up on a thread from just before the break where you sort of explained that Flo Health was a platform where people can come and talk about or learn about subjects that might be taboo or they might not be taught about in school, or their parents might not want to talk about it. And that led me on to one of the questions I wanted to ask, which is how do you deal with or view or think about different standards of conservatism or social norms in different countries around the area of women's health? I don't know if you are in a country where women's health isn't necessarily is something that's even more taboo than potentially in the UK or the US, or like one country that would be considered extremely conservative. I don't know, but I think I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
You know, there's a lot of conservatism in the UK. There is
true.
A lot of conservatism in the US. My goodness, we did a health misinformation report very recently, and we asked 2,000 women in the US and 2,000 women in the UK and tried to find where the gaps are in their knowledge and where, what things are still remaining taboo. Huge numbers are ashamed to talk about or even engage in masturbation, are embarrassed to talk about sex to their partner and what they like. Many women think that tampons will loosen your vagina, and having lots of sex will do the same. There's so much misinformation. It's unbelievable still, even now. And how we deal with conservatism. So we see, again, like we saw from these reports, that there are still gaps. And these gaps, I believe, can be really harmful. I really think it can be very harmful. If you've got all these taboos and you're worried about something getting loose and you think nipple hair is abnormal and you don't want to talk about sex, it can be negative. It can be really harmful for you. Mm-hmm. So we are pretty unapologetically, this is how it is. Here it is. Got amazing sex therapists, and they will talk to you about sex and orgasms. And they will talk to you about that because if you look at the definition of what actually is reproductive health, it includes pleasurable sex. It is part of the definition of reproductive health. It's not just your menstrual cycle and medical conditions. That's a big part of it. Yeah. So we're very, unapologetically, here it is. Here's the information. And I guess the good thing about it is that if you don't like it and if you don't enjoy it, you don't have to use it either. So people have the freedom to engage or not to engage. And if they don't like our approach and the way we speak about things, they of course have the freedom not to. But our goal is to make it as universally accessible as possible, to use language that's as accessible as possible, because we have feedback. I read feedback every single day because I love reading user feedback. You imagine we've got all these millions of users. You can imagine how much feedback we get. I love reading the feedback and seeing people from all sorts of parts of the world saying, thank you so much for sharing this information about, let's say, sex, if we're going down that route, because nobody here talks about that. Nobody told me what I might expect. Nobody told me what's normal or how it might feel, or so on and so forth. So we're pretty unapologetically very open about everything to demystify it and remove the taboo as much as possible.
I can see that, and I think that there's huge value. This is for me one of the real value adds of digital health, because it transcends national boundaries and it's around massively increasing access, and it's opting in. You're not forcing it on anybody, but also you're providing a huge amount of medical oversight, clinical oversight, accuracy, professionalism. So it's not just kind of like, willy-nilly. Well, it's probably a bad pun, but the
it's a very appropriate pun.
Yeah, it's a very appropriate pun. It's done in a very very professional manner, as opposed to sort of scandalous or trying to scandalize or trying to disrupt or put people's noses out of joint. So one of the things so do you know what countries is it kind of officially available in, so to speak, where you're on the app stores in those countries? It's a lot, I assume.
This is
Probably.
terrible. I can't list them all off for you. There are loads, and I can tell you that there's French also, and there's German. So we also translate into various languages. So the penetration is even wider. Not just it's another point. It's not just UK and US English.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
so
makes sense.
It's in lots and lots of countries. I can't possibly list, including in Africa and in Brazil and in France. All over.
So I would suspect, but I don't know, that you've got people in countries where it's probably not available on the App Store, but they're accessing it through a VPN app or something like that, like Saudi or, some of these places that are more traditional. And, I bet you there are people doing that, because otherwise, how do you find out about this stuff? To your point, like it's not like you can go and necessarily have a chat, with people about it in the coffee shop. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the nicest things. When I was at medical school, I loved health promotion. I loved public health. I was the person that would go to the lectures in the morning on epidemiology when everybody else would term it epidemi holiday. Guys, this is the best bit. Like, how can you be missing out on this information? This is so exciting that you are able to do something that can impact so many people on such a large scale. Being a doctor and doing your one-to-one is fabulous. But also, there's something great about being able to step back, look at the wider picture, and do something that can impact so many people in one go. And that's what I love here, is that you are able to, with all your thought and all your creativity, create something that can be positive for somebody's health, positive for somebody's female health. And we research this, and we can see that almost 90%, I think it's 89% of our users feel far more knowledgeable about their menstrual health once they've used Flo. 85% of pregnant users are much more knowledgeable about pregnancy after they started using Flo. So it's, of course, because the information's there, the articles are there, and it's stuff that you otherwise would not come across so easily, also medically credibly.
No, I also think there's an element where ignorance is sort of inherited, or in the sense of, if your mother or your, older aunt or whoever you would deem as the people that you would otherwise get the information from, if they don't have the information to begin with, then, that kind of flows downwards in the same way that you might not be able to pass it on downwards either. So this represents a really good way to get access to that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And misinformation is passed down.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Who can you speak to, and how easy is it to speak to somebody about this stuff that unfortunately is still being considered taboo for so long? Periods are still depicted very often as blue in many places. You can't even see that it is red, in case, I don't know, you offend someone. I'm not sure.
Right. Is it like when they used to do those nappy adverts? I don't know if you remember them back in the day, where they would pour that blue liquid on.
Yes.
To make it because you couldn't show real. So I don't know. Weird.
Yeah, you can't possibly show what it really is. And you think, but why would you want to show that it's red blood? It's too, what are you trying to do? You're just trying to, provoke people. No, actually, if you see something as a thin light blue liquid in a pad, as a 12, 13, even younger, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girl whose period hasn't started, and you look at that and you never really see, because your mum's not going to show you, perhaps school isn't going to talk about it or show you what to expect. It's really scary when you first get your period and you think, oh my God, what is this? You had absolutely no idea what to expect. And it's a bodily process that pretty much every woman goes through every single month.
For a really long time.
For a really long time. It's just one of the most common things. But it's an awkward thing to talk about. Even now, it's still an awkward thing to talk about. So yeah, it's great to be able to be a part of busting some of those myths, making people feel comfortable talking about their female health, because ultimately you're more empowered to get help, to go and see a doctor if you need to find out if that actually is something that you could have treatment for. It's not just normal. Yeah.
And I think PCOS is a really good one there, and we've done a couple of shows on that, where I think the guest that we had on said it was on average like 8 or 9 doctor's appointments before a diagnosis of that, which is
7 years.
years.
7 years for endometriosis, sometimes even more than 12. So yeah, it just goes to show you how normalized a lot of female health symptoms are. And I think if you're aware of them and you're tracking them and you know what's normal and what's not, you're much more likely to get help earlier.
I completely agree. So in the last few minutes of the show, I think what's clear to me, obviously knowing you and speaking to you, is that you clearly value content as a pathway to greater education and understanding and awareness. And you did some work with the ITV as a media medical TV doctor. Like, what is it that you, and I know that you've spoken on other platforms about the value of content and why you believe in it, but why do you think it's so important and powerful?
I think it's important and powerful because it's the best way to convey information. The best way to convey information is through really not just good quality, medically accurate content, but engaging and memorable content. Because exactly as you said earlier, people very often, they'll go and seek advice for the problem they have at that point in time, and then it's gone and that's it. Mm-hmm. But if you put information out there in a way that it's also memorable, it's also engaging, it might stick with you. And then when you see somebody experience that symptom, or when you yourself later notice something, you will think back to that and you will have learned something valuable. You will remember it and you'll be able to use it to help you or to help somebody else. So for me, I think having really great quality medical content is just hugely, hugely important and a great adjunct to healthcare as a whole, because you're going to go to your doctor now and again. What about that 99.9% of the time you are not seeing your doctor? If the better the quality content you have that you can turn to, all the better to support you or to help guide you in all that time.
And did you come to this organically, or did you kind of have an epiphany type moment about that?
I just loved it. No, I always loved content. I loved exactly like I said about the marketing. I love taking something and jazzing it up. And that's always been ever since I was very small. I like to have something and make it better or more engaging or more fun or more interesting. And I just started playing around on social media because I really enjoyed it when it started becoming more popular and there weren't so many doctors on social media, and I was enjoying it. I was playing around about, 12 years ago now. And with that, I realized how much traction that had, how many people were interested actually in talking about health, but in this kind of more open and more lighthearted way, and not just the one-to-one doctor in the room, and nobody ever hears and nobody ever sees. Yeah. And I realized people really loved it, and I also really enjoyed it too. So that's kind of how I fell down.
There you go. Path. Great. Well, look, Claudia, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for coming on. It was great. And where do people go if they want to get Flo? For those very few people that don't have it, just download FLO from the App Store.
Yep. Just look in the App Store, Google Play Store, on the website.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Claudia Pastides from Flo Health, thank you very much for coming on the show. Thank you to everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week.
Inside in the room with platinum and gold eyes, dance and catch your eye, you be mesmerized. Oh, we'll find a corner there, your hands in my hair. Finally we're here, so why? Saying you got a flight, need an early night. No, don't go yet. Oh yeah.